The goose walked around the block again. This involved entering a narrow alley that seemed familiar. He was trying to retrace his steps, all the while looking out for any landmark. The fear in his belly was no animal thing. The fears of animals are straightforward and passing things. This new fear was a spreading, tangled dread, made more difficult to bear by his lack of the natural sense of location he'd lost as part of his transformation. A low moan escaped the goose, involuntary signal of his confusion. He turned around, looking back at where he'd entered the alley. He looked at a dumpster, concrete and brick. There was no location. Every place was the same now. But he had to find his way back to the witch. He was compelled to do so, and there was nowhere else that he belonged now. The goose's last couple of beers were beginning to press on him. He stood in the darkness of the alley, relieving himself, when he heard a sharp voice. "There you are, my gosling." The witch stood not an arm's length away from the goose. She turned and strode straight away from the goose, her back both a command and a rebuke. He bowed his head in surly silence and followed. Shortly they came to Rittenhouse Square, to the witch's brownstone. She fumbled for her keys, opened the door, and gestured for the goose to go in ahead of her. Up a narrow stairwell, rising into darkness. Along the left-hand wall, framed prints leaned slightly away from the peeling white paint, looming over the goose as he ascended the stairs. White rectangles, each with a few black curved lines. The goose had no ideas about what they could have depicted, if anything. They were simply the teeth that lined the mouth he was entering once again. He started as the door beneath him slammed. Weak-kneed, he continued to the top of the stairs, waiting before the witch's door as she locked the door to the outside. Gray Squirrel was enjoying himself, fencing with dandelions. They didn't put up much of a fight, bright heads popping off their stems at the contact of the blade. He was headed downhill towards Pennypack Creek. He adjusted his course to the right along a limestone break to avoid an oblong patch of ramps. Gray Squirrel detested the smell of ramps. He hadn't seen or heard from the ravens since the depths of winter. After he'd taken a raven's eye, he expected retaliation. And so he carried the witch's broken scissors in his wanderings, ready to take another. Gray Squirrel chased dark thoughts from his mind, scanning the ground for signs of the fat white grubs, a springtime treat. Gray Squirrel climbed a big rock for a better view of the ground, sloping down to the limestone banks of the creek. The earth was damp with snowmelt, running in tiny streams, but the rock was warm in the sunlight. He looked across the trail and saw something he had never seen before. On a boulder, looming out over a pool in the creek, stood a red squirrel with long, tufted ears. In one paw she held a slim, flexing willow branch. At her feet were 2 panfish and a bluegill. In an instant, the calm of the morning was broken as the river exploded around the red squirrel. The river was flashes and splashes, bright sun and gleaming iridescent pink bursting around the red squirrel. Gray Squirrel rushed in, half a pair of scissors at the ready, head low.